Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's really more of a ramble, but I wanted to weigh in with some of my own thoughts and commentary on the whole modern versus vintage cards debate that we see regularly resurfacing here on YouTube every month or so, it seems. Now, for full disclosure, I'm really more of a vintage cards collector myself. However, I firmly believe that regardless of the perspective that you have or the approach that you take to collecting and investing, that you can find success in whatever category that you prefer. Whether you like modern cards in raw or sealed form, or if you like vintage cards like I do, or perhaps even if you're seeking after some of those high-level promo or trophy cards in that upper echelon of collectability, that there's still success to be found. Now, I think the middle ground is something that people often lose touch with when we're having this vintage versus modern cards debate. And I've been watching a lot of videos like this recently, including some live streams, one of which I really enjoyed was featuring Jake of Pokenomics and Alex of Nostalgianomics, as they did battle as the ultimate battle of the nomics, and I think both made some really valid points. And if we slow down and define our terms a little bit and look at things objectively, we'll find that there's a lot more middle ground to be found within this debate than perhaps some people realize. So I want to share some of the areas that I agree and disagree with each of these individuals with, but more importantly, I'm hoping to get some comments and feedback from all of you watching this video down in the comments below. Ultimately, it's the masses that determine market prices. That is something that I've heard Alex say before, and he's right about that. So what are you guys thinking? Let me know. Anyway, let's roll into the first point.
The old guard is now, in my opinion, completely fleshed out, and the changing of the guard is happening. But no one cares, because the people who are really running the hobby are not these people anymore. They're the kids. They're the casual collectors. They're the parents of the kids. They're the kids who watch their favorite streamers who get hundreds of thousands and millions of views, and then they go to card shops or stores and they open the products on the shelves, and that's the stuff they connect to. And then their parents see the kids watching those streamers, and they want to get involved in the product their kids are into. And this is what the kids have the memory of. This is what the kids want to spend their money on when they get their own money. And that's where the disconnect's happening.
So this is one of Alex's early points in the video, is that there's been this demographic shift in Pokemon, a changing of the guard as he calls it, from the older, more established collectors of the past, transitioning into the masses, the younger audiences, the kids here in the present. And that's something that I actually agree with him on, and I think is a valid observation, is that modern has been more successful now than perhaps ever. And I also think that that's a good thing. When I was younger and I first was introduced to Pokemon, I was one of those kids, and so I want them to have that same experience. And that's going to happen through the vehicle of modern. Whether it's for better or worse, kids are the future of this hobby. And the question is whether or not they're going to gravitate towards the same modern that they originally grew up with, or as they get older, if their taste will mature and they'll appreciate some of those older vintage items. And that's an area that's only available to speculate upon. I don't think we can say definitively what's true, though there may be some historic precedent for both. You see, when we look back at the history of collectibles, whether it's sports cards, video games, other TCGs like Magic, you name it, the fundamentals are always key. And one of the primary arguments that I think people make sometimes is that popularity outweighs the fundamentals. But in my mind, popularity is one of the fundamentals, and it can be a very powerful one, outweighing some of the others if you have enough masses to move it. But really, I think a better, safer play would be looking for items that have a combination of these things. When they have rarity, when they have scarcity, when they have condition, when they have history, and that popularity, all of those different factors together are going to make for a safer long-term investment than if it's just one of those in isolation. Now, that's not to say that popularity isn't important or that modern cards and sealed product can't appreciate. History shows us that it can and that it does, particularly due to the low price point that you're entering. However, if we're looking at long-term, often what's going to drive that is those other fundamentals. It has to be more than just the popularity, because popularity can wane over time, especially on mass-produced products. If you take something like this, I know it's just a one-off example and it's not representative of vintage cards as a whole, but the Yanma from Neo Discovery, It's not a particularly popular Pokemon, and it's not a particularly popular set, but yet that card has conditional rarity, and because of that, it's incredibly scarce and therefore valuable. It's something that's actually retained its value much better than a lot of other cards out there. So, has there been a changing of the guard within the Pokemon community? Well, yes and no. The argument that kids make up the majority of the demographic for Pokemon, driving sales, I think is indisputable. And I actually think that that's a good thing for the community and for the market as a whole. And the idea that there are certain individuals and larger voices that were previously influential in the hobby want to see it any different is just false. I think this is something that everyone would agree on, that this is what's best for Pokemon. Now, what happens 10, 20, 30, or 50 years from now, as those children age, if they're still going to be seeking those same modern cards that are being released, if they're going to be looking for the cards that are available at their childhood, or if they're going to go back to the origins and some of those vintage collectibles, remains to be determined, but I do think market history would suggest that it's probably all three.
There's a group in this Pokemon investing space that they're all constantly on each other's channels collabing. They're on each other's podcasts and doing interviews on each other's channels, and they just jump back around all on each other's channels. And they all say the same thing. They're all in a big echo chamber. They all agree on everything. And it's all basically based on keeping the hobby the way it was. But those times are over. No one listens anymore. No one really views that stuff.
This is another aspect of the debate that I don't fully understand. The idea that Pokemon investment channels are one-dimensional or that they reflect some sort of an echo chamber just doesn't ring true to my own experience. Now, if you search for Pokemon investing on YouTube, you're hit with a diversity of different channels. Thumbnails including modern cards, thumbnails including vintage cards, and a whole bunch of thumbnails including sealed modern product. Regardless of the approach that you take to collecting or investing, there are avenues of research out there for everyone. And I think that's a good thing. Thinking back to my earlier thesis about how differing perspectives can be equally valid and equally successful, it really all depends upon your approach to it as well as your expectations. Now, I'm hesitant to make comparisons to other areas of investing outside of Pokemon, but think about it this way. If you're making investments, you could invest in stocks, you could invest in bonds, you could invest in cryptocurrencies or NFTs, which I really wouldn't recommend, but those are all available approaches. And even within those different approaches, there are further sub-approaches that you could do. Within stocks, you could look at whole market ETFs, or maybe you just want to invest in one individual stock, which could be a bit more volatile and a bit more speculative. Maybe you want to invest specifically in dividend-bearing stocks. There are a lot of different options, and one isn't necessarily right. They could all be successful. It depends on a number of factors. Perhaps you're the type of person that likes a more passive investment, then sealed modern products might be for you, where you can set aside some money, hopefully enter in at a low cost basis, since you're getting these boxes at MSRP or hopefully even a little bit lower than that at distributor level prices, sitting on them for a few years as they appreciate due to those boxes leaving the market, at least that's how it's supposed to work, and then selling at a profit. It's kind of a boring route to collecting, but it is an option that's out there. On the other hand, maybe you want a more active role. Maybe you have some of that background knowledge and experience to seek out individual raw cards to be able to assess their condition and then send those cards in for grading, then being able to appreciate those arts and those cards, selling the ones that are extra, and using that money to further propel your collection forward. That active approach can sometimes be a lot more attractive to people and have a higher level of gains if you know what you're doing. But again, it all comes down to the individual, the knowledge that they have, the experience that they have, as well as the limitations on their capital and their time. I think this is why it can sometimes be perceived as an echo chamber by others, is there are a group of collectors that have done this for a really long time that actively enjoy the process of building out a collection while also funding the collection through those sales. It's a process that I know I've benefited from and that I've enjoyed along the way, and it's just really more about hoping to share some of that knowledge and experience with others that are hoping to do the same thing. That doesn't make this approach necessarily better than other approaches, but it's what I happen to know, and I know for a lot of other people, it's what their primary experience is as well. And that's not to say that everyone has to like vintage. As Alex rightfully claims, modern is for the masses. It has the popularity right now. But again, going back to my earlier point, I do think that history matters and that historical context When we look at other collectibles like sports cards, like Magic the Gathering, vintage video games, usually those more collectors that enter any collectible sphere, eventually they develop an appreciation and that extra discretionary income to pursue those items that have exclusivity and have some history to what they enjoy. Nostalgia isn't just about what you grew up with. Nostalgia is about appreciating the entity in its entirety, appreciating Pokemon for what it is, and part of that is its history. So that doesn't mean everybody's gonna love it, but I do think that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, people will look to the classics. Maybe I'm biased.
It's dangerous to a lot of the viewers watching these thinking they're being fed good, knowledgeable, solid advice because they're listening to someone who has a large collection that they built before the big boom in prices, or a large net worth in Pokemon, or have rare items or expensive items because they got them back before everything took off. And now since they were just collectors and keeping the hobby alive, but now they got lucky and went through a gigantic boom, now they're an expert on everything forever in Pokemon and in markets.
Finally, I wanted to comment on this idea of the dangers of taking advice from the perceived experts out there. Now, Alex claims that a number of collectors out there who built up their collections before the Pokemon boom were the beneficiaries of luck rather than expertise. And to this, I have to agree. At least for me, I'm perfectly willing to admit that I was the beneficiary of luck, that I never expected my collection to grow and to appreciate in the way that it has, or to look back and realize with regret how much more accessible cards were back in the old days to what they are now. It's kind of mind-blowing to even think about. However, I do think that there is value in the experience of those that have been through these types of market cycles and the history that the market has seen in more than just the last 5 years. The longer back you can go, the more experience you have, the more you're able to recognize some of those different market trends that we're seeing here today, because often history repeats itself. This is something I think a number of Pokemon collectors, particularly those that have entered in just the last few years, don't fully appreciate, and that's that historically speaking, Pokemon has gone through a series of market cycles. In 2011 to 2015, when I first started grading cards, was a period of slight growth as the average price of items gradually, linearly increased. We're not talking like massive movements, but a little bit of percentage gains every year. And then 2016 came around with the hype of Pokemon Go, and everything blasted off just like Team Rocket up to the moon. Immediately after that was a down phase pretty much across the board, whether it's for graded cards, vintage cards, modern cards. Everything saw a little bit of retracement. Now, obviously, modern sealed boxes probably did a little bit better then. I don't know, it's not my area of expertise, but since it was coming out at MSRP, there's only so far to drop, right? But then once again, in 2019, we entered that growth phase, and it was back to that slow linear growth up until the hype of 2020 when the pandemic happened, and then Pokemon's 25th anniversary, the Logan Paul and all the influencers on YouTube hyping up Pokemon. And once again, we're in that down phase. And having that perspective of somebody that's been around for a while can sometimes help. However, you should never blindly trust or put all your faith into any one PokeTuber or personality out there, whether it's me or anybody else. Just don't do it. You need to think for yourself. And the best way to do that is by exposing yourself to diverse perspectives. And that's one of the things that I love about videos like this and these types of debates on vintage and modern, is regardless of what side or what approach or what perspective is your preference, it's always beneficial to hear what other people think. And again, that's what I want to hear from you guys in the comments to know what you think. There's also ways to do holistic research out there and a number of tools where you can investigate for yourself and form your own conclusions. So I want to say a quick thank you to Alex of Nostalgianomics as well as Jake of Pokenomics for hosting that debate. I thought it was really beneficial, and even though there are places where people didn't see eye to eye or where it might have gotten a little bit more frustrated or heated than it needed to be, there is a lot of middle ground out there for everyone. Regardless of what your approach is to this hobby, they can all be equally valid and equally successful. Anyway, I'm Pokemon Classics, and thanks for bearing with me through this one. I know it was a bit of a rambling mess, but I really do enjoy these types of conversations and discussions and consider both of these two individuals to be friends. So, till next time, everybody, remember the classics never go out of style. Stay well, everyone. Enjoy collecting. We'll see you back for the next video. Bye, everybody.